All right, everybody, here we go with the notes for Chapter 6, talking about recorded program production. On-air production is a one-shot affair. There's only one opportunity to get it right. We've talked about that when we talked about the chapter about live production. Makes sense. However, in recorded work, the producer has the freedom to do several retakes of the same production element to try different blends and mixes, or to scrap the whole project and start over again if it's simply not working out. And you might think overall that that's a benefit. And in many ways, there are benefits to those things. However, it can also be a curse in that we're striving for perfection, and sometimes we're worried too much about the perfectionistic aspect, and that can actually introduce opportunities for mistakes and things we don't like and all of that sort of thing. Whereas when we do a live production, it's out in the open. Once it's done, it's done. So even though pre-recorded content seems like it might be less stressful, there's actually pros and cons. The complexity of what you're working on may determine whether you would prefer to do something live versus pre-recorded. A production containing many elements most likely going to need to be done in advance, unless you have a host of people that are working and focusing on different aspects of a project. Generally, if you have a lot of stuff that you're doing, a lot of music, a lot of sound effects, multiple voices, that sort of thing, pre-recorded is usually going to be the way to go. Scheduled airtime could also be a consideration. When does the production air? What is the content of the production? Those things will often determine the need, whether you have to record or if it can be produced live. So you're working with scheduling. And also convenience. Though the use of music and narration for the introduction of a show might be done live if the program is a one-time affair, pre-recording the introduction is far more convenient if it's to be repeated weekly or daily. So if you're doing certain elements and you're using them continually, that's especially a good argument to have that pre-recorded so that you don't have to have the band in every time. You don't have to have the same announcer saying the same thing every time at the beginning of a show. So those are some considerations. The layout of a production studio. Most medium to large studio setups feature a glassed-in area between the main control room and the studio. And there's a good example of what that looks like in your textbook. In large music production studios, the glass divides the performance areas of the studio from the control area so that the producer in his or her own separate studio can look out and see what's happening in the performance area, and makes things kind of convenient that way to see what's happening as well as for communication. The glass is typically double layered and the panes are not set parallel to each other or to the studio wall, and this is to prevent internal and external reflections of sound. Basically, the way the glass is set up in between the studios and between the studio and the outside, it's done for the best possible way to reflect sound and deaden sound in such a way that it's not going to negatively impact the recording that you are doing. That's why when you look at glass in the studio, it is not parallel to the wall. The most typical radio station production studio is a one-room setup with the equipment usually intended for combo use. In other words, the producer, the talent, is one and the same, and it's all there in one area. Although the studio is intended for off-air production as well, there generally will be a router connection or a hardwired link to the main control room so that the output of the production studio can be put live over the air. This offers a few different benefits. One, when you do have multiple talent that is working on a production, it allows the flexibility of being able to use both studios and have those studios conjoined in such a way that you can use audio sources from everything into that one project you are working on. It also allows the production studio to be a backup for the main studio in case there's something wrong that you can't use the main studio for on-air purposes for one reason or another. Equipment in the production studio, layouts and amenities will vary from station to station. Sometimes it's just a computer and a microphone, kind of like a podcasting booth, if you will. Other times it could be stocked similarly to the on-air studio with several different types of inputs, multiple microphones, CD players, other sources of audio coming in. The layouts, the configurations, the options are endless. When the production studio and an announce booth are adjacent to each other, a talkback system between the studios is often used so that the producer or engineer can talk with the announcer. This is kind of akin to the cue button that you have in the control room. Basically, this allows for audio to flow in such a way that it does not impact any on-air performance or any recording that is going on. You can talk to each other through this talkback system and basically not create any sort of hindrance to the project that you are doing. Sound treatments, various materials may be used to dampen sound reflection. I have seen various sorts of things from literal egg cartons, like the cartons from the eggs you buy in the grocery store. That's a very cheap way to do it. Perhaps not fire safety conscious to do it that way. But there are different types of foam material you can buy that looks like egg cartons. There's also various types of sound panels and other acoustical treatments. The studios in Sanford that we have for the college, those are lined with carpeted walls to help deaden sound. Using baffles and portable sound panels allows the engineer to choose between a livelier or deader sound environment depending on the needs of the producer. And this is something that's especially helpful in music production if you're trying to create a certain acoustic feel or a certain warmth to the performance that is being recorded. And that gets involved with understanding how sound reverbs within a certain room and bounces off walls and things like that. So there's different strategies that are used to try to create that optimum sound that's being recorded without having sound bounce all over the place. When working in a production studio, anyone who undertakes the duties of a producer is responsible for knowing more about the process of radio production than is someone who simply acts as an announcer or a technician. If you are a producer and you are working on a production in a production studio, you need to go in with the mindset that you learn about how everything works in that production studio and basically become an authority on that. Because especially when you're working on a project, you don't want to have to sit there and think, okay, what does this button do? Where does this audio feed go? All those sorts of things. It's best to be able to learn that process to the point where you don't even have to think about the ways and means of doing things when you're in the studio. It might be more efficient to break down the production into a number of discrete tasks, like doing all the music work first, all the narration in one particular point in time, even though that it's not the sequence in which the components will appear in the final product. This is where the power of editing really becomes prominent, in that, say you have a voice talent that's only available for a certain amount of time. Maybe you have 30 minutes with that particular person. So you need to get that person into the studio, have him or her record all of the pieces that they need to lay down. And then after that person is gone, you can work on the other elements like inserting the music, perhaps having other voice talent come in and record their lines and things like that. And then in the editing process, put everything together in such a way that it's going to flow the way that the final piece is intended to. Time demands on a studio are usually pretty high, and you'll be able to get in and out much faster if you learn to plan work in a task-oriented sequence. That's basically what we've been talking about here. If you have 3 similar commercials to produce, it might be useful to do the announcing for all 3 first, then add the music beds and effects to all 3 following that. This is especially helpful when you're doing commercial copy and say it's using the same music, it's about the same campaign. If we're talking about commercial production, go ahead and lay down all of the tracks so that there's some sort of congruity in the way that the voice talent is presenting all of that material. And then, of course, the music beds and sound effects and things like that will be pre-recorded. They could be put together in a session file, and then you swap out the various reads as is necessary. Always structure your tasks according to the most convenient and efficient method for the best use of the production studio that you can make work for you the best way that you can. In other words, think about your time constraints and your deadlines. Think about the availability of other people that are helping on the project, and try to put things together in such a way that it's going to make the best use of the time, but also help to make sense in terms of what sort of things might be required to be laid down before something else happens. Say, for example, the music is an important part of the production that you're working on, that someone has to say something in such a way that it fits a certain rhythm or cadence with the music. You may want to go ahead and make sure you have that music available and ready to go first before you bring the talent in, so the talent has the music as a reference point to be able to do the job that he or she needs to do. Speaking of music, where do you get music from? Well, the use of music is licensed to a radio station by means of a fee that is paid to various music licensing organizations, and a listing of the more popular ones is there on your screen. These performance rights do not extend to using a particular piece in a commercial, however, and this is really important. When radio stations get licenses for popular artists, popular songs, it's for the rights to play that as part of the format of the radio station. In other words, you're playing the music for the sake of playing the music. However, to use popular music for other purposes, for commercials, for announcements, for things like that, that is not covered by the basic license that is provided to radio stations. That requires getting special permission to use a specific song for a specific commercial piece. In radio, we call this a transcription license. So if you want to use Master of Puppets by Metallica for a song, for a commercial for some reason, you actually have to go to the music licensing organization that covers that particular song and say, we would like to use this song for a commercial that we're doing. Then the license organization will come back and say, well, if you want to do that, it's going to cost this much money. Or they may just flat out say, no, you're not allowed to do that. So that's something to keep in mind as well. You have to make sure that you follow that process, because if you don't and you're caught, you could get sued, and you can get sued for a lot of money. So unless there's a very specific reason to use a very specific song from a specific artist, you tend to want to stay away from that. And if you decide you do need to do that, be prepared to pay a significant fee for the rights to use that song, or to pay much, much more money if you wind up getting sued. Production music produced for broadcasting is readily available online as a service provided to the station, or may come from a broadcast production library on CDs. This is generally the way that radio stations get music for the purpose of productions that they are putting together. The company providing the music may charge the station a standard fee called a blanket license for the use of an entire library, or they might charge by cut or based on the number of downloads the station uses. This type of music is specifically for the purposes of using within programming content, commercial content, and that sort of thing. And there are agencies that specialize in this type of music. Recorded original music fits the most common production and time requirements of typical stations. This is another great feature of production music. So you'll find music beds that run the exact length of many typical commercial lengths, for example. And sometimes there'll be different musical arrangements of the same theme, so that you might have, say, like a full production of the music piece versus one that's more acoustically based, or one that maybe has vocals added to it, like some background singers or something like that. They tend to offer different variations of the same musical selection in order for the producer to be able to decide if a certain version is more appropriate than another to use for a particular project. Advertising agencies commission the composition of original music for clients and are another source of music. So this might be a case where, say, you have an advertising client that there's a desire for creating a jingle. That's something that you would commission a artist to create for you. That becomes incorporated into the campaign. And then, of course, you pay the artist for the work that he or she did. Some larger companies provide their franchises with standardized commercial beds that can be localized at the different radio stations by adding closing tags or some other specific elements that provide the location of the business. Many times we see this as a nationally produced commercial that may have like a 10-second music bed at the end of the commercial for a local announcer to give a specific location or franchisee's name or something like that. But there's other ways that this sort of production works as well, where the national company provides a certain amount of the content and then leaves holes in the production for local insertion of local announcers, local business names, that sort of thing. When choosing music for production work, a commercial can gain significant impact through the selection of a good music bed that reinforces the message. That's a key element here. You want to make sure that whatever the project is that you're working on, when you decide to use music, the music needs to fit the certain mood and attitude. It needs to fit the target audience that is being sought after, and all those sorts of things. You don't throw music on just for the sake of throwing music on. If you choose poorly, it can detract from the message or even be at odds with it. So that's something you really want to keep in mind. Radio stations often categorize music held in their libraries by various type, not just formats in the way that we tend to think of it, but also fast, medium, slow. There's categories like inspirational or industrial, motivational, and it goes on and on and on. The descriptions of the selections offered by production libraries can really help you kind of get a feel for what the music bed is before you even get a chance to listen to it. Styles of music, basically, know that the style of music chosen for a particular production can complement a message or achieve a desired effect with the listener. Now, if you want to do a deep dive into this, I encourage you to take a look at the textbook. Pages 125 to 126 kind of gives you more of an idea beyond just talking about format and that sort of thing in terms of how music can really help to complement something that we're doing. And with that, we'll take a break. We'll finish the chapter with the second video here on Chapter 6.